So this video is going to be on approaching, things like spacing, scouting, covering angles, and some FG 101 stuff, but I'm going to try to go into a little bit of everything. I kind of want to start with some 101 stuff for Dengeki and fighting games in general, but one thing to keep in mind with this game is characters sort of fall into like two categories, right? There's characters with insane ground control, things like Asuna, Taiga, Kirino, where their movement's super fast. They have these normals to really dictate a lot of space, despite being this far on the screen, right? And then there's characters who can control the air, and Asuna also falls in this category. So does characters like Yuki, Taiga as well, in my opinion. But they also fall in that category. But usually, outside of these higher tier characters, they're gonna fall into one or the other, and that's sort of why I have Shizuo set up here. So if we think about Shizuo, right? Shizuo, he very slow on the ground. 5B is slow. 5A has the speed of a 5B. Dash 2A isn't really gonna accomplish much, and it's slow. So he's sort of left to abuse JB to control space, JC to sort of get into spaces he shouldn't be in, but can get away with because of it, right? But the idea there is there are characters who are best on the ground, characters who are best in the air, and characters who are good at both. And it's really important to sort of group characters into these categories because it can really decide how you want to move and space yourself. So we're gonna get outside of matchups again. We're gonna go to just standard FG 101 stuff, and that is spacing in general, right? So we're gonna look at our characters' best tools first. So we've dictated that Asuna is good on the ground and in the air, and that's really what makes her have among the best neutral in the game, in my opinion. I mean, honestly, maybe over Shauna as well, just because of options. But I mean, you know, it's ambiguous, and that's not really important. The main point here is, unlike somebody like Shauna who is best in the air, or unlike somebody like Taiga, I don't know about Taiga. Well, it's not too important, right? My point is she's great in both areas, and she's great because you have this dash A button to control space or put yourself in spaces. You can dash and feint with air buttons and all of that. So this best spacing is going to be kind of ambiguous, and with Asuna in particular, I think this best spacing is going to be right around here, right? And the idea is you have this sort of leeway to stay out of the opponent's space, and you can jump scout around in case they dash up. You can dash and retreat. You could dash all the way in. You could dash and jump. And the main point here is that Asuna can sort of do this from anywhere on the screen. And we're going to look at some Jin footage later, and he just sort of idles around here. And this is where the opponent's best spacings come in, right? And with Shizuo in particular, we have to think about that he's limited to air movement, right? So Shizuo's probably not going to be running at you. And if he has Celty, that'll be something else as well. But Shizuo is sort of limited to air stuff. So we have to consider something, which is how limited vectors are for air movement. And vector is just a term to describe like approach angles, right? So like this would be a 9J vector. This is going to be your vectors for double jumping. Just the different angles they go to. And these are important because when you commit to these different air vectors in this game, it's sort of high commitment in a way, because the moment you commit to double jump, you've seceded your options, right? Like maybe somebody like Shizuo could dive kick, but that's going to cost a bar to cover if you're wrong, and that's assuming the opponent even moves forward. It's the same with Asuna, right? So we're ideally looking for matchups like Shizuo, matchups like Shauna, matchups like Akko even, right? These characters who are a little bit slower on the ground, and they want to really abuse their air tools. So we want to play at a range outside of 9J buttons. That is the base idea. So if we set the dummy to be on, we're sort of at this range to where they whiff the button. And this is really good because if we back up, we notice they whiff a button, we can jump in and pin. Or, this is when it gets more ambiguous, Asuna isn't only a ground character, right? So because we fall into both categories, ground and air, that's probably not a good way to look at it. We can do stuff like this. Preemptively angling ourselves above these round start 9J approaches, or like just above where people would normally jump in from. And with characters like Shizuo, unlike Asuna, characters like Shizuo who are only good in the air, they aren't going to dash under on reaction to you doing this movement. So this really cuts off their approach angles and bullies them to where they have to play more passive. And so the key idea here, right, was we're playing outside of 9J spacing. But of course they don't have to hit a button, right? There's different options out of this, and this button is fucking insane, holy shit. So we need to talk about other options. So not just 9J is an issue, we have to think about the different flow charts out of a 9 jump. And these sort of vary. And these are why this 9J thing is something you're not always going to be able to answer, right? And that's why we play outside the spacing. So if you try, here we did this, right? And if you try to pin this on it whiff every single time, you're not reacting to the normal whiffing, right? We're reacting to him going downwards and landing. So if he does something like this, and we try to react to him almost landing, we're gonna get hit, right? And because of that, it's not as simple look for X and do Y when X happens. We're sort of feeling out the opponent's options, and that's what scouting is. We're feeling out the opponent's options by looking for things and sort of playing our cards and sometimes holding. We don't always have to go in. And that's when the linearity of movement comes in, right? So I talked about it earlier, but when you commit to a double jump, you're basically, you're done, right? Like that is, you're not done in the sense that you've been caught for it. So let me go back and reiterate here. You're not done in the sense that you know you're going to get punished every time. You're not done in the sense that you're going to get anti-aired for it, but you're done in the sense that you don't have any more options to play with. You know, you sort of said, I committed to this because I was looking for this. This being, I committed to double jump because I was looking for you to try to pin my initial landing, or I committed to double jump to deal with you doing the jump thing earlier, where we jump back and then double jump forward. Which, in the case of him double jumping, it puts him above us, right? So there's a few ways to deal with this. One could be just preemptively dashing up. Or somebody like Asuna, that's going to put you under, because his character's a little crazy. You can wait it out. You can look for the double jump, and then look to JA it or JB it, because of how high JB hits with Asuna. And you can look to ground it anti-air it, but the issue with something like 2B is not only it losing, but people doing an early air button. And so to reiterate on all this, because it's going to get complicated, but we're just going to go ahead and go over it all again. Just a little bit, just a little short thing. So 9Jing is the basis of neutral, right? This 9J spacing. And that is around here, where characters can just jump forward from their current position, and that is going to give them the space to land, to fall with a button. And then what makes that ambiguous is double jumping. So if you double jump upwards, you could angle yourself above rising JAs. You could, in the case they walk back, you could get it to a spacing to where you're less disadvantageous on landing. In the case that they 5B, you can follow the button and whiff punish it. And in the case of them doing a jump of their own to angle themselves above a 9J, you could double jump above their double jump, and they're sort of checkmated movement-wise, to where they only have the option to sort of concede, which all of that is really good. So we'll go ahead and do those options real quick on screen again. So here's the basic 9J idea. to which I need to turn the dummy on. I walk back. I double jump to get above it, which hopefully you don't get too AD'd for. You have to be a little quick with it. Sometimes you're going to get too AD'd for it. And then, of course, he has other options, right? So he can 9J double jump back, which is going to be harder to pin for characters that aren't Asuna. He can neutral double jump, into which you can try to rising button it, to where you can try to dash 2B it, into which maybe you could maybe angle yourself above it, but you do run into some risks there. There's one final option out of double jump, which is sort of important to consider. You might see it with more greedy players. It's not very good, but it's a thing that could happen sometimes. And that's just where people do 9J and then 9 double jump to catch the walk back. And if this happens, I mean, this should be pretty free to anti-air, because you're looking to pin that initial landing, right? So they have no options out of double jump. An anti-air of some sort is guaranteed. Dash under is guaranteed. Rising button's guaranteed, you know. So it's not a great option, but you might see it sometimes. So that's some basic air scouting. So this spacing's really volatile though, right? Because while Shizuo could only move in the air, it's not like he doesn't have grounded options, right? Like he could, in theory, from round start spacing, commit to a dash 5B, or he could do something crazy like that, or he even has Celty, right? So he could 5S round start. And so when you think about how you're looking for a 9J here, and there's grounded choices, and with characters like Asuna, Taiga, Kirino, Yuki, where they are good at both areas, we don't want to gamble. We're basically gambling by looking for a jump and also having to deal with ground. So that's where the idea of what's reactable comes in. So if we play here instead, if we play somewhere like here, Shizuo now has two options. Outside of moving and baiting you in with his movement, which we'll get to shortly. But he has two options, and that's super jump and 5S, right? So we can sort of do a few things to deal with this. We can sort of look for the super jump, to which we maybe buffer fuzzy dashes to... Oh, I made him super jump so late. Hold on. We can look to get under the super jump. Or we could 7J. And on the 7J, we're looking for a super jump and pressing a button on reaction to the super jump startup. Right? Like, that's an option to look for the super jump. Characters that aren't Shizuo, this is really important. I realize his cross-up button's fucking insane, so I want to just do this. Around the spacing, like here, what I was talking about, where we're only dealing with super jump and 5S, you can move forward slightly, and on the super jump, you can just sort of crouch. Oh, maybe not against that. Hold on. Right about here. And we just sort of dash up slightly to move forward. Oh, I suck ass at this game. I'm terrible. It's going to vary from matchup to matchup, but this is a genuine thing where you look at the super jump vector, and you can sort of crouch under it. And I know that sounds risky, but the thing is, right, cross-up normals are super uncommon in this game. Kirino's cross-up normal is good by this game's standards, but it doesn't hit that low and that far back. Shizuo's charge JC does, but in the case of that, there's things like the fade back JC thing we just showed, where the slower startup lets you get away with reacting to the super jump angle. Something like Quenter, his JB doesn't hit very low, so you could easily duck under it after walking under a super jump. And if he's super jumping at you, he's not even playing Quenter correctly, so that's a whole different thing. I just let go of my lever there, sorry. There is another thing to worry about with super jump, and it goes back to the 9J thing, where you have double jump options. And I showed some of the double jump counterplay and RPS that we can play with. Yeah. So that's a choice. But back to the spacing thing, where we're playing at this spacing. So that was things you could deal with for super jump. And then with 5S, I don't even want to get into assists right now. We'll just think about super jump. But basically, we've established the super jump spacing because now we can... I'm getting messaged again. We've established the super jump spacing because we've made other choices reactable. That's the key here. By playing at this spacing overall, this is sort of our way of telling the opponent we are respecting them and we deserve that respect back, right? Because what you can do at this spacing is you can start doing scouting movements. So you can, at this spacing, do stuff like dash A buttons versus characters that are more ground-oriented. Things like Asuna, things like maybe Kirino, things like occasionally Yuki, because Yuki might be doing dash 5B. But you can do stuff like that. You can also dash up and then fade back to that spacing again. And what that does is, with stuff like this, or with dash 5Cs, you know, dash grounded options, by dashing and retreating, the opponent themselves might do the 9J thing again. They might, from super jump spacing, do this to feint themselves, because they can double jump back to be safe, things like that. So if we have Shizuo do a 9JB, and we fade back to the super jump spacing, we're going to dash up and retreat. Oh, or we're going to do neither. So we're going to dash up and retreat. And we retreated and put ourselves out of that 9J spacing. And if he didn't hit a button for us to pin the landing of, and he double jumped, we play the double jump RPS. We could anti-air it if it was a bad double jump and we're close enough. We could look to pin it if it's a double jump back by dash buttons or dash 9J to get above grounded RPS options, things like that, right? But the super jump spacing is really good for that reason. And so the way to think about it is we're basically, I always describe it as a tug of war, but to be specific, it's like we're sort of playing with this idea to where both sides here have plenty of advantage to work with. You could dash and retreat, and you're not going to normally get murdered for it. You can dash and jump around, and characters like Shizuo can't really deal with it at this spacing. They have to move in a little bit. And then alternatively, we can start actually approaching. So actually approaching is things like dashing into the spacing and then doing stuff like this. And this is ambiguous because they have to worry about you possibly double jumping. They aren't going to immediately jump on you for doing this. And if they do, they run the risk of you double jumping again, or not again, but double jumping after your jump, double jump retreating, to where the line of am I advantageous or not is ambiguous. And then they run the risk of you not even neutral jumping, but just doing this. And they were waiting for a double jump here. Let's look at it that way. You were doing this to sort of bait in approaches, but then you decided to do this. And they not lost neutral, but they are no longer in that advantageous state. You can do things like dash A buttons. So you do a micro dash to sort of get into that jump spacing. You look for what they're doing. They're not doing much. And then you dash again, right? Or you can just, from about here, commit to A buttons every now and then. And the timing that you do an A button, you know, you get the idea. But the general goal is thinking about the vectors that people can jump in from. And then with characters like Shizuo, it's going to be a little bit more reactable, and so he has to play a little bit slower. But characters like Asuna, we run the risk of her getting into these scary spacings so much faster, and the choices being ambiguous. And so that's why advantage and disadvantage is so important. And to emphasize what that means, because maybe you've been sort of keeping up, but you're like, okay, what do you exactly mean by advantage and disadvantage? So in these games, there is no landing recovery, right? If you don't hit a button, but if you hit a button, there's a little bit of landing recovery. But in general, on landing, you are disadvantageous if you are within the opponent's button spacing. And so that is where that's where the concept of grounded advantage comes in. So it's going to be a little bit harder to show with Shizuo because he's so easy, not easy to disrespect, but he's easier to disrespect than most of the cast. So we're going to pull up Kirino. And, well, I didn't even need to do this because I guess I can show it from Austin's point of view. So when Kirino, let's say she does what we were doing with Asuna earlier. She dashes up and then fades back with JC. Hold on. So at this spacing, the super jump spacing, if we were to see that fade back and try to pin it, she's already jumped away, right? But at this round start spacing, we can sort of catch that. That doesn't confirm on Asuna. I'm sorry, I'm a Yuki player. But the point is we are so much closer to where that landing is disadvantageous. And so the idea is we are doing these jumping movements outside of the spacings where these characters can cover them. So Asuna, that's somewhere as far as here sometimes. But for most of the roster, it's somewhere as close as here. But the issue with being as close as here is you run the risk of dealing with 9J stuff. And so... Oh, why is force counter on? I was wondering why he was getting countered earlier. And so the spacing... I don't know where I want to go with this. I'm sort of freestyling it. That's what makes the spacing the best spacing. I guess one final thing to get into before I try to recap everything is that your assist is greatly going to influence approaching and how you have to approach. So I've picked Kuroneko because that's what you normally pick. And she sort of enforces not interacting, right, with 5S. And so you can play around this super jump spacing, look for super jumps, because it's the only way over a Kuroneko 5S here, and you're sort of counterplaying super jumps, and then you're going back to being lame. And then every now and then you could actually approach yourself. Because obviously Kuroneko, I mean, if she crouches here, whoops, she's out of it, right? And you can... And if you try to dash up to play the advantage, she might 2A you because she's not in block stun. She's not even in proximity guard, I don't think. So you do have to approach, and you do have to play that spacing thing we talked about, where we're playing with advantage and disadvantage and baiting in movements and trying to encourage people to jump forward and angle ourselves above their jumping and stuff. But with stuff like Kuroneko, you can really not do... You can do nothing and still be a threat present, right? So something I also want to talk about is Celty is really popular with both Asuna and Yuki. And so if you ever want to run Celty, a way to think about Celty is that the idea of advantage and disadvantage gets really, really ambiguous. Celty's super degen, so... This spacing before we were talking about, or something like this, is hard for even Asuna to pin at this range, because she could just jump again. That is no longer the case with Celty, right? So Celty, we see the double jump, and we 5S the landing. And if they jump again, like I have Kirino set to do, they might get caught. I guess they won't always get caught, because she doesn't hit that high. But the point is it sort of forces neutral threat, and then you can dash up afterwards and get pressure started, right? So with Celty, what we're looking at is this spacing, and we're always a threat to people jumping. But at the same time, if they don't jump, they run the risk of dealing with Celty. And one of the most common answers you'll see to this is super jump. And so if Kirino super jumps over the Celty 5S call, she'll punish it. Hold on, I gotta actually do this right. Right? Like, that's a punish. So what we're doing with Celty in particular, if you're running Celty with Asuna or Yuki, is we're playing that super jump spacing, and we're doing that super jump RPS. Where we're looking for the super jump and trying to play around it, and we're moving at spacings to bait that super jump vector. Which, you know, it's sometimes you can't do the fade back button thing, but you know. You're moving around the opponent with super jump in mind, and you're constantly playing with the idea that you could 5S them for running at you, you can 5S them for double jumping, you can 5S them to pin their landing, and you can basically always be a threat without ever approaching and committing. And so I guess we'll go ahead and we'll wrap everything up. We'll go ahead and go over everything sort of one more time. So our basic idea in neutral for any character is we're putting them in boxes to where they're good on the ground, they're good in the air, or they're good at both. And our best space with something like Asuna is going to be where our dash buttons are not very reactable, and to where we can transition from dash button approaches to feinting approaches. So like dash, do nothing, and look for things. Dash, jump, dash, retreat, dash, move forward. And there's so many different options. And so what we do there is we encourage the opponent to play further or to give in and try to commit to deal with us. And if they give in to commit to deal with us and we do something like this, or we do something like this to angle above a 9J, we win that interaction even if we don't directly punish them for it. In general, thinking about how the opponent single jumps is super important. If they're doing a lot of 7J and 8J, then they are playing very passive and giving you respect. And when you get this respect, you have to encourage them to move at you by sometimes just 9Jing, and not necessarily that committing to a button as much as sort of angling yourselves above them and getting in their space to make them uncomfortable. And you can do stuff like retreat. So by doing this, I mean, maybe you'll get pinned for this, right? Like Kirino could pin your landing for this, and you sometimes have to hold and you have to give, quote unquote, give up and block. But at the same time, in the case of them finally committing to this decision, and by trying to air it, you can react to the rising air button whiffing and then hit something like JB, which I haven't shown yet, but we'll just go and show real quick, just real fast. Oh, whoops. And I know that sounds crazy. It's like reacting to a whiff button, but the point is we aren't looking for other things and reacting to this. We are literally moving and jumping with the intention of looking for these air-to-airs, looking for these dash-ups. Like we are looking for people doing dash button. Like, that's the point of finding the character's best box, whether they're best on the ground, air, or both. We are thinking about their best tools and how they're reacting to us using our best tools. So in this case, Kirino could air-to-air, she could athlete dash, and she could 5B. So we're sort of seeing which one she's picking and how she wants to deal with us and things like that. So we got a little too off topic there because I want to continue the wrap up. The other big issue is things need to be reactable, and we need to not necessarily get punished for looking for certain things and being wrong. And being wrong doesn't mean getting hit. Being wrong means you have to concede. You have to give up advantage. So for example, if we are moving like this because we're looking for 9J and we only want to look for 9J, well, you've double jumped here, and Kirino's going to pin your landing. And if you try to re-jump, you're going to get dash 5 aid. So sometimes when you think you're wrong, you're going to have to block, or you're going to have to fuzzy jump in these spots, right? Don't try to always gamble the disadvantaged state. Sometimes you're just wrong about the neutral, and then you sort of can do fuzzy jump stuff. To avoid dealing with that too often, because you do have to do it every now and then, but you don't always want to be in that spot, we play at these further spacings like this, and this keeps us outside 9J range. This lets us deal with the super jump thing we were talking about with the super jump vector, where we buffer micro dashes to get under a super jump and crouch, or we fade back a little bit further, and then we can slap a button on the super jump startup from the opponent and things like that. And then finally, I guess what I want to talk about is just some theory, and that's this reactable thing is super important. So something in particular that players will do is they will full screen dash up, right? Or they super jump and do a button every time. And you have to think about ambiguity, and you have to think about covering multiple bases. So when you are at this range as Asuna, you are only a threat with 2A and super jump, or you're only a threat with super jump. If you dash up all the way, I mean, sure, she's really fast, but if the opponent's looking for super jump and they start seeing you dash, their impulse could be to jump of some sort, or to hit a button themselves. Like sometimes I'll look for Asuna players full screen dash A buttoning, and when they start to dash up like that, I'll just do a micro dash 5B as Yuki, or micro dash 2A. Even if it's going to whiff them not moving all the way up, it will cover that crazy action. Or I'll just jump and then follow the button like this. And because the single jump's so ambiguous, even if it whiffs, I might just fucking do it again to catch the landing pin, right? So you have to play this tug-of-war, this poker game, to where when you catch yourselves in these spaces and you're like, oh, I need to move forward, you don't just slingshot yourself in. You slowly creep in to this 9J range, right? And then you play the 9J game where you could back up again, you could commit forward, you could double jump around to get above different angles. But my point is you're keeping in mind that this spacing, things are reactable. This spacing, things start to get scrambly. And we're sort of on that line of being in and out of both, to sometimes commit forward and sometimes bait them committing forward, right? It's more complicated than that, but that's sort of the best way I can describe it. I'm not really sure where else to go from there, since I'm sort of freestyling this, but I think that's a really great start to start thinking about. I remembered at the last second that I said I was going to go over Jin footage, so I do want to go in and go over some of his Anime Evo 2022 stuff. Or I guess it's called Vortex Guy right now, but I just want to go ahead and go over some of his ideas that he does here. So we'll just start from his losers run. His initial winner's side was sort of rusty. You could tell he was getting used to the game again, and then he ate like 2 slices of pizza, and then he's playing Dengeki again. So his round start, he's sort of at that spacing we were talking about. He backs up into it and sort of plays around it, that ambiguous reactable and unreactable spacing. And we're only going to really go over some approaching things, so stuff like this I'm not going to worry too much about. He looks for a double jump here, like I talked about before, where a double jump is super. It's like an end game thing, like you've basically committed to nothing, and he does a rising JB. Or not committed to nothing, but you've overcommitted. You've given up your turn. Does micro dash move to neutral and ends up behind the opponent. He crouches under the super jump like we talked about before. So this is super important to consider. He, right here, after the push block, he's sort of at the spacing to where he's looking for a 9J, like we talked about. And on 9J, he can walk back. He could try to walk under with Asuna. I don't know how that goes. He could try to dash under with Asuna, which is going to lose the early air button. Or in this case, Lunar super jumps. He just continues crouching because, again, you can duck under super jumps. And then he hits buttons. And, you know, of course he loses because memes, but the idea is still there. Right here in the corner, he's looking to angle himself above a 9J because he's noticed that Lunar is super jumpy. He's done a lot of super jumping. And if he were to super jump here at this angle, he would be able to JA Asuna here. But Asuna could react to that super jump startup and just slap out a JC. She could slap out a JB. And he does it again. And he does a JC in reaction to any air movement there, right? We'll go back again. And it actually would have worked, but that double jump was really good on Taiga's end. Does a basic 9J to scout. And sort of just slaps JC. And this is just like 9J is such a good option. especially in the case of NA players, to where they accidentally sit in this commitment bubble for too long, that scrambly space where you're too close to cover everything I was talking about, which is what happens here. So just a 9J sort of catches him. Like, clearly Lunar was probably expecting it somewhat, but because he was so close and because there were too many options, I don't know, maybe he was looking for a double jump or just a neutral jump in the corner, and because he just chose to jump forward out of the corner, he was too slow to react to it because he was too close. I can hear you. Basic 9J scout. I mean, this really is scouting. Like, it is that simple sometimes, to where you just jump forward like this. You see what they're doing. In Lunar's case, he's not walking back. He's sort of just chilling, and he just slaps a button. So this wasn't an option I really talked about for dealing with double jumps, but I guess Jing wanted a better... He wanted to get out of the corner. He wanted better advantage in general, so he sort of super jumps after the double jump. But like in this spot, oh, he's already super jumped. He wanted to super jump immediately before this even happened, was what it was. So he was just trying to get mid-screen, and Lunar had double jumped. But if you weren't trying to super jump here and you're Jing, in this space, you can dash 2B right around where this third sandbag is and sort of catch them falling with a button. You could micro dash 9JB, or you could pin the landing. Like, that is some basic neutral decisions here. Well, you honestly could have killed there. That's fine though. He chose to kill himself, so Jing didn't have to. There's not too much to talk about there. We'll go and skip ahead slightly. Another thing about super jump approaches, I mean, I think it's too hard on net play, but it's an option, is you could look to rising button it on reaction to the super jump startup with JA, like he does here. He's playing around that 9J spacing again. He's sort of ambiguous to where he's in super jump spacing, but also can move into 9J spacing to put himself under a super jump, or to approach himself, or to back up afterwards. Chooses to move forward because he notices Lunar is sort of passive, sort of slower with moving forward on it. I think that's what before AV, I have no clue. 9J scouting, yeah. So in general, you can tell Lunar is sort of, at least in this set, is pretty uncomfortable with approaching himself. It's a lot of super jump. It's a lot of double jumping in place, and sort of Jing just sort of abusing that. When Lunar lands and waits, he just does basic 9Js to sort of poke at him to encourage him to jump again. And then you'll notice Jing will fade back sort of later in these neutral spots, and he'll jump in place to angle himself to where he could JC a super jump, or he'll look to JA it. Yeah, he's literally just, he's just running it over and over, and he's just testing to see what his opponent will do to answer it, and if he'll adapt and adjust. And in this case, the answer was no. And that's the first game. I don't know how reflective the other games are of the first set happening again, but I might just skip forward a little bit to his set with you. Yeah, you'll see he's entirely focusing on the idea that Lunar likes to super jump. This fade back can deal with a dash up. It would put him in a spot to JC on a super jump, and he's sort of playing with that idea. Right, there's super jumping again. Yeah, it looks like that's gonna be most of this set. Yeah, it looks like it's gonna be most of the set. Okay, we'll skip ahead slightly. Are there timestamps? No, that's fine. We'll just skip ahead normally. Oh, wow, that 5B was crazy. Yeah, you'll see he's sort of looking to deal with these double jumps by getting under it. And that's the thing about using your double jump too early. It's that idea of, again, overcommitting, which could result in something like Asuna doing dash under 2B. And that's sort of why you have to be in that space to where something like a 9J forces them to move back to cover it rather than answer it directly. And you can do it at further spacings even if it's going to be a landing whiff because of the ambiguity of double jump. And of course, nothing is that simple, right? Like, you're not just doing all this stuff I'm talking about, but these are concepts to keep in mind. Like here, he just sort of waits and he's dashing up, and every now and then he just does dash A buttons or he's doing dash 5C. It just, you don't have to only do what I'm saying, but these ideas will deal with a lot of layer 1 stuff, especially in American play. Oh wow, that hit so fucking high. Just scouting. Yeah, he's playing with that space again. You'll notice here he's giving a lot of respect to Yuki, because again, like we talked about earlier, where you box in character types, Asuna and Yuki definitely have the same character thing where they're both good in the air and the ground. So he's just sort of giving up space, and this will deal with 9Js, or it'll be a very far JB at most that can connect, or she can get herself in a spot where she's above a dash button whiff. So you'll notice he just does a lot of retreating, he's giving up space, playing at that ambiguous space. And then when he finally feels like he gets this sort of advantage where you have landed, I mean, maybe here you could have jumped again, and that's sort of why, I guess it's there, that's sort of why he just does a 9J. And in the case you double jump back, he could still land on time and then have ground advantage again. Nice. Okay, just pressure stuff. More pressure stuff. What the hell happened? Wait, what happened? I didn't mean to skip so far. Oh, ooh. Fucked up walk speed. We'll skip ahead to next game, and then we'll call it there for now. Yeah, he's just sort of waiting. He's sort of ambiguously, again, being, you don't always commit to one or the other. Sometimes you just sort of wait in between, and that's sort of what he's doing. He's like, okay, what is my opponent gonna do when I get into these ranges? Oh damn, he definitely does not remember doing with the young Yuki 2AB. Oh yeah, he's got like the delta counterplay going on. I don't know why he tried to meter air to air. Oh, he calls out the double jump with a trump. Yeah, I mean, I think it should be pretty clear what he's going for, but of course, if not, you can always ask, and I'm just gonna go and call it there.